Welcome back, everyone, for the second part of Monet. And, I'm going to say Monet was above the rest when it came to, his fellow Impressionist artists, like Cezanne, Van Gogh, Matisse, Picasso that we're going to talk about. They had this unusual power of perception of the, visually and otherwise. And also with Monet, I want to say he had a sense of duty. He knew he was talented. I mean, you know, not that everybody told him so. He's just, he knew he could paint. And, with that, there's a part of him that's like, well, okay, I don't want to keep painting the same thing over. I need some new discovery, some freshness in my life. And, but there was a drive and a curiosity that was very powerful that kept him moving forward and these discoveries of things that had not been seen before. It's like a beauty waiting to be shown. Monet was digging in, trying to find those, and all for us in a sense, and for him as well. It's fulfilling, but more interesting ways to make that connection with the painting. And again, too, when you make that connection, there's also that sense of, you're making sense of things in a sense. So it helps you with your own life and helping others with theirs. So the first area, we're going to talk about three areas that where he made the difference. It's like with the green stacks here. And I believe there's 20 plus paintings, finished paintings of these, but there would have been, hundreds of studies, et cetera, many paintings destroyed or painted over. But what Monet would do, he would go out to this area here where these green stacks are, and he would take 5 canvases or 10 canvases, and he'd start one at 6:30 in the morning, and he'd capture this magical light then at sunrise. Do one at noon where the light is not so good. Maybe it's a cloudy day and he's watching the clouds moving in and out. But basically what he's painting here is of course he's painting these grain stacks, but he's also painting the light and the color that light, the function of light gives us. And what Monet is trying to say here that, or what he has discovered, that is, getting the object right is not so much important as getting these harmonies like Pissarro, these harmonies in nature right. And so this exhaustive study of being outside in this bigger space among this, these every few seconds or nanoseconds, the light changes and these different relationships appear and disappear. And Monet just studied those intensely like no other. And it shows in his work. And, it's kind of a precursor of what goes on in modern art. And then after the grain stacks, we'll talk about his ethereal paintings in the space and then into the water lilies. But back to the grain stacks, it's like paint the light, not so much the object. So, it's like, well, what is light? Well, I'll answer that in a second. But first, Wassily Kandinsky, the Russian painter who at the turn of the century was one of the first major abstract artists, long before Pollock and Rothko in 1950. But Kandinsky painted like a wild man, and they're just incredible paintings. But anyway, so, he was training academically like everybody else, and he went to a Monet exhibit, and he saw that this is something he wrote. He said that it was a haystack. The catalog informed me. I could not recognize it. This non-recognition was painful to me. I considered that the painter had no right to paint indistinctly. I duly felt that the object of the painting was missing, and I noticed with surprise and confusion that the picture not only gripped me, but impressed itself irreducibly upon my memory, and painting then took on a fairy tale power and splendor. So Wassily gets it. Wassily Kandinsky gets it. It's like the indistinctness, and it's like the critics of the salon said, well, your shapes are too indistinct. It's like, that's not the most important thing here. That's not the thing that's going to make you connect the best. And it's these harmonies of the light and the day that Monet was after. And he practiced. It's amazing probably what he saw, and to have the perseverance and the patience and and the drive to go do that, I think is, pretty amazing. And well, let's look at a few of these, like this painting here on the left. It's like, well, here, let me move on to something else. Oh, talking about what is light. Yeah. So, I don't know what light is, to tell you the truth, but look it up in the dictionary. It said it's a natural agent that stimulates sight. Okay, that sounds reasonable, but how does it do that? And well, it has photon particles and it has electromagnetic waves. And it's like, well, okay, but that still doesn't really get it for me. So let's think of it as in terms, we have this light coming from the sun, and we'll call it a white light. But within that white light, there's this spectrum of red and yellow and green and purple and blue. And what determines whether something is red or blue or yellow or green? It's the molecular makeup of the surface. And one surface is going to absorb every color but green, and it's going to reflect the green. So it's going to be green. One surface is going to reflect red, but it's going to absorb all the other colors. And, that's about as far as I can go with this. It's whatever that white light is hitting, the molecules that compose that surface will determine which of the lights within the spectrum, which of the colors in the spectrum it will reflect. So I don't know. I just felt like I had to say, because everybody said, well, he paints the light, or this artist paints the light. It's like, well, what's the light? Well, it's color, is one way to do it. But all these harmonies going on of, this area reflects yellow or orange, this area reflects green. And so Monet is out there copying these, and so what's going into his toolbox and his consciousness and his kind of inner knowing is like, well, that green with that yellow, that looks really cool. And there's just a zillion relationships here, a zillion harmonies, harmonies galore for him to get in touch with. And if you're out there enough, some of those are going to sink in, and you'll be able to use them later in your paintings. So point this out, these in the Renaissance, two of the biggest tools that came into being, which livened up the paintings, was perspective, and then this light and shadow here that gave a form 3 dimensions. And perspective, we have this tree here in the front is in theory the same size as the tree in the back, but to make this painting honest and sincere, and whereas it doesn't, it's something you connect with and you feel this sense of volume and space, you make this one smaller in the back, this one bigger in the front. And then, the sphere over here that has this light hitting it up here on the top right, and this shadow down here at the bottom, and then the shadow here in between. And this gives this object, this form, depth and light. And it's like, look at this green stick here. We've got the light coming in over here. We got the shadow. So that's giving that form. But, to me, this painting, it's more about how this green stack sort of melts into this spot back here. There's perspective going on here, big to small to something smaller in the back. But there's kind of a flatness to these paintings where, there's this blending with the whole, this melting into it, this transcendence into this space. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. So here's an example. So the painting down here at the bottom is Card Sharps by Caravaggio, and I believe it's a 16th century, sometime in the 1500s. It was painted. Rembrandt 100 years later. And note on the Rembrandt, this light right above his left eye here, that's where my eye goes. And in this Card Sharp thing, my eye goes, maybe to her chin over here, or her cheek over here, but it's kind of into this focal point of this within this triangle. And triangles are a big thing in composition of paintings. The Rembrandt, there's a triangle here, and we kind of go to the peak of the triangle. But the point here that traditional painting up until Monet and thereon, it was about going to this one focal point. That's, to me, it's that's what's got you out of yourself and into this great space. And there's not so much focal point in here. This haystack is a focal point, it's just too obvious. And but as Kandinsky said, well, it's indistinct. Why would you paint something so indistinct? And it's like we're trying to get it to blend in with the back. We're trying to make it whole, and that's going to give us a greater sense of space and a greater sense of ourselves. And I point this out. This is my daughter's dog, Franny. She's a wonderful dog, but forget this is a dog, and in the black and white, it's more stunning here. But look at how this light hits upon her. When I'm out in the field with her and she's running around, the sun is low. This luminosity of this coming off the back of her, and this fuzziness here. It's shocking to see it. It's like, whoa, that really stimulates me. So I feel like I'm Monet out there when he sees some really cool light. And another instance, personal instance. This is a motel room I'm in at the Sagebrush Inn in Taos, New Mexico. Sagebrush, a wonderful place. If you've ever been there, no room is the same, and even the same room is never the same once you go in it. But it's a cool place to stay. And anyway, so I'm waking up and I see the light coming in through the curtain, through the crack in the curtain, and it hits right here in the doorway and makes this incredible light. And I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone. I mean, it's like, what a cool light. It's so cool. It's like I say at the top here, there's a lot to like with light. But then 5 minutes later, this is what happened. Maybe it's 10 minutes later, but it was very short time. I've got it on my phone, Ella. But I was just shocked at how it went from this amazing, spiritual energy to this blah. And, again, I'm just trying to point out what Monet was up to, thinking about. And a great painter of light that kind of brings this home a little bit is Edward Hopper. And I believe it was in the 1950s. He was on the cover of Time magazine, so that kind of shows kind of the height of his popularity. But he said, maybe I'm not very human. All I wanted to do was paint sunlight on the side of a house. And, he got these dramatic, he captured these dramatic moments of light. And, it's color too. Another one of his paintings. Kind of funny there, the door out, drop off into the sea. One of his most iconic paintings is his painting Nighthawk. And, Pissarro, the harmonies and the relationships. One thing that makes this painting interesting to me is, it's nighttime outside, it appears. But we have this contrasting relationship of light on the inside. And it's kind of spooky outside, but it's warm and comfortable on the inside. And like, a story, a literature or a play, there's a protagonist and antagonist, and you need one to make the other stand out. And one other thing I'll point out here, which is completely unrelated to Monet, but just a painting thing. Notice how the shape of this building it's going to go off into this vanishing point, off in here to the far left. But then notice that we have this curve of this road that kind of wants to take you around that way or bring you around this way. So we have these contrasting movements and this, those are always usually, all paintings have something like that going on in them. Another, here it looks like it's the evening, nighttime, but we have, we're on the road and alone, but we have this rest stop to stay, that's kind of a relationship, but we have this great lighted place where everything's comfortable, but we have this road going off into the distance. So Camille Pissarro that I talked about, this is a Monet on the left and a Pissarro on the right. Pissarro in later years, still speaking about light and how important it is to the painting. And Pissarro had a hard time in his later years being outside. The glare of the light would be painful for him. So he got up in his room and overlooking here the boulevard, and he would make several of these paintings. He would start them and get the building on the left, the building on the right, the trees, the buggies, and the people on the street. And then he would wait for a magical time of day and he would start to work on the painting and start putting in the color to match the light. And this was subsequent to Monet's grain stacks, and I know they were friends and talked. So it's like, maybe Monet said, "Hey, your light's bad. Get up in that room and try to do this." So the second area which sets Monet apart is I'm going to say, is space. And, these ethereal, gauzy, atmospheric paintings, they're just wonderful. And Monet is to have said, he said, I want to paint the air between me and the object. And, just think of that he doesn't want to paint the object. He wants to paint the air between it. And Picasso, which we'll talk about, he said something, I want to paint smoke that I can drive a nail through. So there's this tangibleness to this space. And a wonderful abstract artist, Frank Stella, who recently passed away in his 90s, just this past year or two, he said, one element of a great painting is it's creating space. And when that space can dissolve into its own perimeters, it's really magical. And I want to say the perimeter of this painting, it dissolves. There is no perimeter. We just melt right into it. And, we're part of this whole. It's a wonderful feeling. And again, this kind of ethereal, gauzy, fuzzy Monet on the left and a realistic painting of trains on the right. There's definitely a different feel there. And this is a early Monet landscape on the right, and then one of his later paintings when he was in his 80s of the water lilies. And there's none of the the recognizable points or images here in this painting on the sea, and that's it's a different sense of space. And back to the card charts from Caravaggio. Look how kind of like in this Monet painting, there's this perspective here and this kind of triangle here, and our eye would go into here, go to this drain and the light and the dark. But do we go there as hard as we go in this Caravaggio? And it's like, I want to say I don't. And I kind of like that feeling. It's different. Is it better? That's a great argument for art. It changes. There's no doubt about that. It changes over time, but is it better? I'm not sure the answer to that. But Monet in this ethereal kind of atmospheric painting, this creation of space, he didn't invent that on his own. He learned it from a fellow named Eugene Boudin, who lived in Le Havre. And Monet was in his late teens, like 18 or 19, and he met Boudin. And one of the things, not only Boudin showed him how to paint these atmospheric paintings, but he told Monet, you got to go outside. And so Monet is a young artist that's trying to make it into Paris. So he goes to the art schools and he draws figures and chairs and, cast of bust and all that stuff. And, the very academic training. But Boudin said, yeah, that's great. And you got to learn that stuff, but you need to get outside because this is where it's at. Again, it's like harmonies galore are just waiting to be discovered, explored, and enjoyed. So here's a Poussin painting here, and a Boudin painting on the left to just kind of show you there's kind of a different mood going on there. And then we have Monet on the left and Boudin on the right. And, these were earlier paintings from Monet. And, he was picking it up from Boudin. And this Impression Sunrise, I forget the date of it, but it was painted long before that 1874 Salon show where it got the title and the recognition and the term Impressionism came. But, did Boudin have what Monet had? Yeah, I want to say he did in a sense, but maybe Monet just had a little extra. Maybe that's a silly question to ask, but Monet said, hey, if he got a lot of attention for this painting, he would say, hey, Boudin taught me everything I knew. I have no doubt that he would do it. But both these guys, Boudin and Monet, they picked this up from an artist from London, J.M.W. Turner, and who was born in 1875. So, that's it's what 65 years before Monet and Boudin was like 15 years, so 50 years before Boudin was born. So Turner was painting this way, for a long time before. Just imagine it, let's say we're in London in 1825 and, Turner shows you one of these paintings, or, the Salon in Paris got wind of it. They would just like, let's use that as a doormat. So anyway, I admire somebody like Turner that he knows it. It's like what Pissarro was saying. It's like, no, this is good stuff. We're going to paint it anyway. And intense love of painting and intense love of the harmonies in the world he was connecting with. This is one of his paintings, Fighting Tamaray. It's much more recognizable. You can tell that's a ship, but it takes a little extra looking. It's indistinct, and the salon people would say that's, you need to make it a little more clear. And it's like Turner would say, no, if I make it clear, it ruins the mood. It ruins the sensation of what I feel when I'm outside. And the Tamaray was, I don't know my naval history at all, but it was the Lord Nelson that, was in all the great battles. And this is, I don't think he was plein air out there painting them on site, but it may be from a story. But this is the tugboat bringing in the Tamaray to dismantle it at the dock. Its days were over. So there's this symbolism of, its final voyage, which makes it neat. Monet on the left, Turner on the right, Monet on the left, Turner on the right, Monet on the left, Turner on the right. And I didn't know this until I started looking into Monet, but James McNeill Whistler, American painter, but lived in London, lived in Paris, lived in the Normandy coast area, but he was buddies with Boudin and Monet. And so he was into the JMW Turner thing as well. And, I talk about how the paint is maybe more important than the object. And the title of this painting, I'd say, oh, that's Whistler's mother. Well, the real title is Arrangements in Gray and Black, #1. So, I take from that Whistler, he is having a great time playing with gray and black. He said, what am I going to do today? I'll play with gray and black. Well, how am I going to express that? Well, I need to put my mom in there just maybe so the critics won't be too harsh on me. But, this is an abstract painting from Whistler. So he's 1834, 1903. I mean, to have painted this at the turn of the century is like, pretty amazing to me. I had no idea that Turner was Whistler was so out there. And, he just loved how the paints, the magic that they made. Some more Whistler. So our third area, besides, this painting the light with those green stacks, or creating this magical space with that kind of ethereal look that Monet had, it's the last 20 years of his life. It was, we'll call it the Water Lily series. That's kind of a common thing. It's more complex than that, but there's 250 paintings supposedly. And, again, there would be thousands of studies and many paintings torn up, painted over. But for the last 20 years of his life, this is what he dedicated himself to. And, my thought here is, and instead of, we've already shown that Monet is like, no, he's curious about other things than painting a pretty picture. And, I think as artists develop and evolve, it's kind of like what's more important than painting a pretty picture is, look what I'm connecting to, and let's see what I can connect to. So that's what I think of when I look at these water lilies. And at the Les Oranges in Paris, there's a big display devoted to Monet's water lilies, some of them. And the best I can tell, it's like there's 300 feet of canvas there, and it's 6 foot tall. So that's a lot of painting that he did. But right after World War I was over, Monet decided, kind of in a support of peace, etc. As I read the story, he said, I'll dedicate these paintings to the Les Oranges. And the Les Oranges, I'm not sure what it had been before, but it was being repurposed at this time to exhibit artist, living artist in and around France, or maybe Russia too. I don't know, but so that was 1918 that the idea started, and then the opening was in 1927, a few months after he had passed away. But again, this is where this was his focus, not just for the display for the L'Orange, but painting in his garden. And Clemenceau, the prime minister of France that led them through World War I, he and Monet were close buddies. And I don't know how long the relationship lasted, but I know Monet's wife passed away in 1911, and he passed away in 26. And he and Clemenceau were side by side during a lot of those times. And Clemenceau was a big fan of Monet. Monet was a big fan of Clemenceau. And this, I'm assuming, is the opening. So what's new about these water lily paintings that's that's different from kind of your typical wonderful impressionist painting? And in these there's a hint of an horizon, but there's these are landscape in nature, but there's really no focal point. And yeah, what is that about? And it's like well, I've got a lot of verbiage on here, but let me keep moving. So look at a Monet and the Caravaggio versus this, water lily painting. It's like there's a lot of hinting going on, a lot of implication. It's like, well, there's way too much. And, it's like, I think that friend said, don't, take it past that first impression and see where it takes you. And again, his ability to understand the harmonies of light and color, his ability to understand, to being in a transcendent space, it kind of all comes together with these paintings that he did of Giverny. And what's going on that this stuff becomes popular, and 20 years later, 30 years later, 100 years later, and so what's going on at this period of time that Monet is kind of in touch with this more grander transcendent space. And I think about, there was an episode of The Twilight Zone, that great TV series in the late 50s and early 60s. And I think the little boy's name was Jimmy, and here his parents. And so one day or evening, he just walks through the wall, and he's not on the other side in a room, or he's not on the other side in, outside the exterior wall. He's just in this space. And so they have a neighbor that's a scientist. So he comes over and he's trying to figure out where he went. Well, it's the beginnings of Carl Jung and Einstein. And there's a book called Art and Physics, and it talks about that artists are clairvoyant in a sense. And, a physicist understands the world, like, Einstein's theory of relativity, whatever that means. But, the Big Bang, the black hole, all that kind of stuff that in a scientific way, it explains who we are and where we are and those kind of things. And it's like the artist was already kind of in touch with that was coming into our consciousness. And it's like simultaneous with a physics discovery is this sense of our existence that an artist is painting, and this kind of wholeness that's in these water lilies, I want to say, is, sort of related to that. And think about this here. On the left, what do we have here? It's, I don't know, some kind of exploding star, or just a exploding light bulb or something. But it's, magical, mystical. And then on the right, we have, let's call it the Milky Way. It's just, there's no focal point. There's no horizon. There's nothing to grab onto. And this image on the left, the photograph on the left, it's like, well, we grab onto all these spikes going on in these lines, and it's coming out. But, we have this black hole. It's like, there's a lot to kind of grab your attention there. And here, there's nothing to grab your attention, but it still does, I think. And that's kind of how I'm thinking these water lilies do. And then, 50 years later, 30 years later, we have Jackson Pollock with this no focal point, no horizon. But, these kind of paintings are taking the world by storm. And yeah, so another painter I want to mention that's the modern art that's a little bit beyond this no focal point kind of fourth dimension that I'm talking about is Joan Mitchell. And I'd say she would have been a little bit younger than Pollock. It's kind of that second generation of abstract artists. She grew up in Chicago and then studied in Chicago and studied in New York, and then ended up going being kind of a dual citizen of New York and France, and bought a place outside of Paris near Giverny, where where a Monet painted. And you know, you can look at a lot of her work and you can just see Monet and the colors and just the energy of Giverny in her work, very abstract. And you know, here's one of her pieces on the right that I'm kind of syncing up with a Monet, and there's just this kind of similar kind of quality of the energy that she was picking up on that Monet was. Same thing here. Joan Mitchell on the right and Monet's a cropped area of one of his garden paintings on the left. And pretty blurry image, but this is some of those 300 feet of 6-foot canvas at Les Oranges. More of his water lily stuff. And you know, this like you can obviously recognize that's the sky, and these are trees and the water and the reflection and everything. But as these paintings are getting less recognizable, you know, Kandinsky, you know, that grain stack is indistinct. You know, what is that about? It's, you know, there's a saying that you know, ambiguity is fuel for kind of contemplation. So, you know, the less certain it is, you know, maybe it's a little more scary, but it's like it's the more opportunities are to kind of engage. And like the grain stacks, you know, these are kind of similar images with different colors, different lights. And note this painting here. And then I black and whited it on here on the right. And then note this photograph I saw in one of the books on Monet. And it's like that, you know, photograph before they had color. And look at all these black and whited, like that crazy Andre Derain landscape with all the blue and the red and the purple and everything. It's like when we black and white it, it's all about these relationships of blacks and whites and grays. And you know, here's a Monet, that same Monet painting. I put it into a black and white mode, and just see how complex that is. And you know, there's no way, I think, that just kind of throwing this out there, the human brain can like calculate each one of these areas. There's got to be a bit of an intuition that's going on. You've got to be into this rhythm to be able to paint this. You kind of got to go into this different zone to, you know, to paint this like a computer or say artificial intelligence. You know, it could get each pixel right, each, you know, area, this every, you know, square centimeter. It could nail it. But the human being is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to get nailed in a different way, I guess, making a different relationship. His studio here, working on these paintings. Oh, and I forgot to mention his cataracts. Well, I think I said something earlier. He did have cataracts for years. It was troublesome. He had, you know, and there's a lot of literature that it messed him up here, and this painting would have been better. But in result, he still got these paintings done, and they're absolutely wonderful. And the last, he had 2 operations, I think, and one of them worked pretty well. The last one. So let's sum up Monet. So you know, it's like Monet 1.0. You know, he's a master among those masters. You know, Degas, Renoir, Toulouse-Lautrec, I had mentioned. You know, the Pissarro, Sisley, Seurat, but these are some of his great paintings. And you know, I just, it's hard not to like them. And I pointed that earlier that I just, when I saw this picture, I knew of this, you know, one of his early pictures, and I just saw that he still had it in his studio. mean, if he had to rent a storage locker, his bill must have been very high, but yeah, I don't think he had to do that back then. And then we get this Monet 2.0. I want to say this is, it's like modern art today is still, grasping onto these areas that Monet dove into with everything he had. The properties of light and color, the space. And this, I don't think I mentioned this, but I think of a molecule. A molecule has protons, electrons, neutrons, and whatever Monet painted here, there's billions and trillions and zillions of molecules going on, and they're all moving. They're all alive, and it's kind of like, this is amalgamation of all kinds of diverse things going on, and it's like, okay, well, let's paint that. Let's paint that energy, and instead of painting a pretty picture, it's like this might even be a prettier picture. Monet the Master. And then it's a great book here. I highly recommend it. It's got everything in it that you want to know about Monet. And I want to go back to this painting. I think we compared this earlier. This Flemish painter, Tenier, wonderful painting, Monet painting on the left. And, I pointed out how, that our Flemish Dutch painter had to get everything right in here, and he did. And he does a wonderful job. And then, that primal energy of his, it's in there too, this wonderful palette. And, the way the light is here and there, it's like, it's incredible. And then, we get to a Monet and Impressionist painting, it's like, I want to say they take shortcuts, and it's like there's implications. And sometimes an implied message is much more strong than a direct message. And that's kind of one of the things that's going on here. And then look at this one here. So Monet railroad painting here on the left or on the right. And, the objects within this painting are not near as recognizable as the objects in this painting, the forms. And the point being, it's not so necessary. And, this painting here, it's like, which would you rather have on your wall? And, I say, I'm going to defer to this Renaissance painting. It's like, oh, it grabs me like nobody's business. But then I want to say, if I compare the two, if I had $1 billion, which is what probably they both cost, but if I wanted to compare the two, yeah, there might be something a little bit more transcendent, a little bit more, like a bigger energy with the Monet. I don't know, but it's a wonderful thing about it. But I want to say what Monet was doing, he was taking paintings like this and he was making them like this, and he was in touch with a bigger energy. The world, humanity was in touch with the bigger energy, and the paintings of the day wanted to reflect that, and we were asking for that. All right, thank you very much. We'll do a demonstration for the class later, and Monet, not a bad guy. Thank you very much.